two guest speakers today, Tracy Norell with the EPA and Andrew Schulte here in support. And we're going to pass the baton over to them. They're going to go ahead and share their presentation and jump right in.
All right, let me just pull this up, and maybe Tracy, if you want to take the lead in introducing yourself and kicking things off.
Great, I'll go ahead and do that. Hello, everyone. Just as I said, I'm Tracy Norell. I work in the Energy Star program at US EPA in Washington, D.C. In the commercial buildings portion of Energy Star, and I work with our utility partners and our service and product provider partners. So I'm going to start off the presentation today to say some high-level things about Portfolio Manager, and then pass the baton over to Andrew Schulte, who works in support of Energy Star under contract, and he's with ICF Incorporated. So you want to go to the agenda slide? So this is these are the things we're going to be covering today. As I said, say some high-level things about Portfolio Manager. Talk a bit about the value of benchmarking that we've observed over the years by various parties, and then we're going to talk about the options for getting data into the tool, and then go in a little bit more in depth about the automated transfer, the use of the web services. And I don't know, Jessica, if you want to encourage everyone to go on mute, because there was a little bit of background noise there.
Yeah, if everyone wouldn't mind just throwing themselves on mute. If you don't know how to do that, happy to jump in there and mute you in a second. So we'll give you a bit, but.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, let's move along then. So benchmarking with Portfolio Manager. I mean, in Colorado, there's a lot of experience with the tool. This is the third workshop. It's been mentioned in the previous two. It's in the pending legislation. So we realize there's exposure to the tool, but we do like to just sort of cover a few basic things at a high level, just to ensure, so we don't go charging off and talking about Portfolio Manager and not cover that base. So Portfolio Manager is a tool offered by EPA's Energy Star program. It's free, publicly available, online, and secure, and you can find it at energystar.gov/benchmark. Will get you there, and this is just a screen capture of the tool itself. The throughput in 2019, there were over 260,000 buildings using Portfolio Manager to track and benchmark their energy use. We developed the tool to support partners who were coming in and joining the Energy Star partnership and working to better manage their energy use as a tool, as a way, a means of giving them to get a handle on their energy use. Now it's taken on a life of its own in the market. It's somewhat become really the kind of default standard for whole building performance benchmarking. It's embodied in over 36 local, state and local benchmarking policies, and it's also in use in Canada. Next slide. So those are the basics. Free online tool available from EPA. A little more in depth about a couple of basic functions of the tool. One is it's a data management tool. So folks can enter in their energy bills for buildings and assess how consumption of energy, water, and make comparisons doing that. You can track green power purchases in the tool, and then any data that's put into the tool can be used. You can be easily shared with other Portfolio Manager users, or you can pull out reports and share those with others as well. You can track changes in energy over time, water, calculation of greenhouse gases is offered, and then you can also track costs, although that's not factored into the energy metrics directly. And in addition to sharing standard reports, you can create custom reports. And finally, using Portfolio Manager is the mechanism for applying for Energy Star certification for a commercial building. And that's just simply if for buildings that can receive the 1 to 100 Energy Star score, and score in the top quartile, 75 or above on the 1 to 100 scale, while maintaining a safe indoor environment, have that certified by a licensed professional, you can actually earn certification for the building. And next slide. And so there's data management, and then there's a metrics calculator. The two key things here. One is energy consumption front. You can look at energy from a source energy perspective or a site energy, and see that data in weather normalized terms. So there's a basic benchmark available for any building entered into Portfolio Manager, and that is sort of the weather normalized energy use intensity. For most of the key categories in the commercial sector, there is also the 1 to 100 Energy Star score that I mentioned earlier. So those are key performance metrics, and then there's other calculations of greenhouse gases and other consumption of water and that type of thing. So basically, what does benchmarking allow you to do? One is you can compare your building to a national sample of similar buildings. That's largely what's done with the 1 to 100 score. We also provide national medians that can be used if the score is not available for your building type. You can compare similar buildings you control to each other. You can track an individual building's performance over time. And we always encourage folks to use the tool to benchmark their full portfolio of facilities that they control, and use it as a way to identify underperformers, or to really sort of sort out the portfolio from underperformers to middle performers and high performers. And you can do that to begin to target resources and efforts. So again, 1 to 100 score, but any building can get a benchmark. So that's sort of the tool in a nutshell. But so what feeds the tool? What kind of data do you need to actually benchmark a commercial or multifamily property? One thing are the building use details, and those differ by property type. The common ones are square footage of the building, number of operating hours, number of occupants, and this information is typically gathered by the property owner or manager, or service provider who's helping with benchmarking, and we kind of underscore that here in the context of a discussion about utility support through providing data access for benchmarking. That typically, in a scenario where utilities involved, is very much the property owner who provides those property use details. So one key component of data are the property use details. The second is the whole building energy consumption data. Portfolio Manager calculates its metrics at the whole building level. So you need to account for all the energy consumed in the building as a whole, all the different fuel types. And the way the metrics are calculated requires a minimum of 12 complete consecutive months of data. So you do need the 12 months of data by fuel type that's consumed. And while data can be entered into Portfolio Manager on a meter by meter basis, it just as equally can be entered at the aggregate level. So there's no requirement in Portfolio Manager that there has to be an association between either physical meters in the real world and meters as they're represented in Portfolio Manager. So you can go either way, but the aggregating data by fuel type is acceptable. I mean, it's more an acceptable approach. In fact, that's what the tool will do on the back end if you actually put in higher resolution data. So those are the key types of data that are required. Next slide. A bit about the value benchmarking. We looked at EPA, we looked at 30,000 plus buildings that had consistently benchmarked year after year in the period 2008 to 2011, and found trends in those buildings of energy savings and score increases. So which suggests that consistent building benchmarking, you're really using as an ongoing management practice, does promote energy savings and improve performance. That's sort of a fundamental point. Next slide. I've mentioned this a bit, in terms of what a building owner gets from benchmarking. They can evaluate the performance of their portfolio of facilities, in addition to understanding the performance of an individual building, comparisons to the national median. You can also look at sort of trends over time that would be evident in monthly data. And again, really pull together the data to track various measures of energy use, water use, and we do actually provide the ability to track waste as well. Next slide. In terms of benefits to utilities, this is a piece it was written by one of our partners at ComEd in the Chicago area. And as he said, they use benchmarking as sort of a gateway to their energy efficiency programs. It was a sort of a first step, a way of helping their customers get a handle on their energy use, and then using that to bring them into their program offerings as ways of improving that score, to the extent that they wanted to do that. So it was really a sort of, point of engagement for their broader utility energy efficiency offerings. Next slide. And I think it's a way, we've seen it, that it's a way of turning customer needs into opportunities for a utility. Increased customer satisfaction. I know last month, Kurt from Fort Collins talked about how they send out surveys, sort of customer survey satisfaction, at the end of each year. And I think, by helping folks do something they need to do, it is a way of increasing customer satisfaction. Again, it is a point of engagement. I'd say, positive engagement. And given the sort of perspective of looking at energy use overall in a building, I think it does position utility to be in that role of a trusted advisor. Sort of, it's not necessarily tied to a transaction related to a specific program, but has a little broader interest of the customer reflected in helping them, get a handle on their energy use and benchmark. Next slide. So some of the ways that utilities capture that value, they range sort of from the top of the list, is sort of lower effort relatively, and then as you go down this list, requires a little more effort. Some utilities just want their customers be aware of the value and the availability of benchmarking. So there's some education and training that goes on. Some have integrated benchmarking into their program design. We see this a lot of sort of whole building type programs, retro commissioning, pay for performance type programs, or it might even be included as a requirement for participation. And then increasingly we're seeing utilities use support benchmarking by making it easier to get the data that's required to benchmark it, make it easier to get the 12 complete months of data that's required. And then really being able to take that to scale, working with customers by implementing the Portfolio Manager web services and automating that process to a greater extent. Next slide. And at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Andrew Schulte, and I'm in doing that, I'm going to make one handoff point that he'll illuminate as he gets into his talk, is that in moving to web services, the last point on the previous slide is it helps take the support to scale, but it also opens up a two-way flow of information between the utility and the customers receiving the data, so that in that exchange of data and information, the utility also sees how the performance of the facilities is turning out for the customer, and sort of begins to give you a unique view into the opportunities that may exist in a particular customer's facility. So with that as the handoff point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Andrew.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tracy, and thanks for laying the groundwork. And we recognize that there is a range of experience with Portfolio Manager on the call today, probably ranging from lots to none at all. Our decision to take a few minutes at the front end to sort of situate everything and contextualize everything is based on some experience giving this presentation, talking all the way through it, and then realizing there were a few people on the call who maybe didn't even know what data were required by Portfolio Manager. So we wanted to make sure to establish a common baseline understanding, certainly for any utilities or other stakeholders on the phone that feel that they need better grounding in Portfolio Manager and benchmarking in its kind of manual and basic form. We'd be happy to provide you with the necessary resources. So now, as Tracy noted, and the reason I went back to this slide is, really we're talking now about, what are the options for utilities supporting data access? And when we talk about data access, we're talking about a few different things, but one example, one potential pathway is the use of the Portfolio Manager web services application programming interface. And we'll lay this all out now. So we're going to talk about the main options for getting data to the customer. The first thing we want to do, I know we showed this slide earlier, but just want to reiterate, as Tracy noted, that there are two main bins of information required to accurately benchmark your building in Portfolio Manager. The first one is all the information about your property: location, size, operating attributes. All of these things are typically expected to be known by the property owner or manager or their service provider. Basically, whoever is benchmarking either voluntarily or in compliance with a state or local ordinance, they're expected to have that information. The second bin of information is whole building energy consumption data. And generally speaking, you would think that all building owners or their service providers would have this information. But as it turns out, that's not always the case, especially when you consider that the unit of analysis in Portfolio Manager is the whole building. So especially in situations where you have a multi-tenant scenario, such as large office buildings, large multifamily properties, or certain retail configurations, depending on the leasing structure, you may have tenants that are billed directly by the utility. In this case, you've got a disconnect between, what the owner and manager of the property needs to benchmark and what they have access to, right? In a situation like this, they may only be the customer of record for the account or accounts that represent their common space consumption. But for all the other consumption that adds up to the whole building, they may not be the customer of record, and therefore they may not have easy access to the data they need, right? And so because Portfolio Manager seeks to benchmark at the whole building level, if you don't have total energy consumption reflecting total all energy used to operate the building, then you don't have an accurate benchmark. And so we've got this disconnect where it's possible that the entity responsible for benchmarking, especially in an ordinance setting, the owner or manager, may not actually have easy access to all the data they need to comply. And that's what brings us to this situation of, utilities being asked to help provide the information to their customers. And there are various scenarios out there. I know in the Colorado, in the pending statewide ordinance, there is there would actually be action required of the utilities to provide these data. And the idea there is to ensure that, when the ordinance comes through and, building owners are required to benchmark, they know that they will have the information they need in order to complete this activity. So whether it's a utility or whether it's another third party, how would an entity, and I'm just going to say the utility for now, but how would the utility get these data to their customers upon request? And so there are two primary options that we see out there in the marketplace: spreadsheet-based delivery and the use of Portfolio Manager web services. Now, I want to make clear that both of these are considered valid and valuable forms of data access. Okay, they both serve the end result of helping the building owner or manager get the data they need to benchmark. But there are some differences between them that may impact your decision on which approach you're going to take. And we do know that there may be differential approaches required based on how large a utility you are. But it may be that there are some folks who are right on the dividing line and may need to decide, well, which is the right approach for us. So we want to help talk through that so you understand kind of the pluses and minuses of all approaches. As we read through this, keep in mind some key considerations when selecting the delivery option that's best for you. Again, the ability to transfer aggregate whole building data, the ability to provide regular data updates to your customer, having a goal of limiting manual data entry wherever possible. And then, as Tracy noted a little earlier, which of these options allows you to obtain information in return about your customers' properties. So the spreadsheet-based delivery approach, in simplest terms, what happens is a customer makes a request for data. Typically the utility will have some process by which the customer can identify themselves, can validate, and authenticate who they are and their valid need to know. What are the service addresses associated with your building, just to make sure that they can find all the relevant meters and accounts on the back end. But basically the utility, once they get the information they need, they'll prepare the data, they'll package it up on their end, and then they'll send it through to the customer in a spreadsheet format. And ideally, this would be a spreadsheet that has been customized for easy upload into Portfolio Manager by the end user. That's a key point, though. The point is that the end user does become the middleman here. They get the data, and then they are responsible for taking the data and putting it into Portfolio Manager. So there is still, even if it's copy and paste, even if they're using an upload functionality, they still are a necessary link in that chain. The spreadsheet-based data access approach, we see it most typically used for the one-time provision of a year or more of data. So jurisdictions or utilities that are offering this service, typically what will happen is upon first request, they'll provide a user with some multiple of 12 months worth of data so that the user can build up a historical record in Portfolio Manager and then, up through the most recent year. Typically speaking, then what'll happen is the next year, when it's time to report again, the user will once again place a request for the most recent year's worth of data. The utility will provide it. And then that transaction is done. The key here is that once the utility provides the information to the customer, they really don't have any further visibility into how the customer is using that information or how the customer is benchmarking. It's more of a transactional one-way data provision approach. The Portfolio Manager Web Services pathway is one that we tend to see as a more kind of end-to-end full service pathway. The idea here is it would still need to be initiated by customer request. There would still need to be a process for user authentication and validation. There would still, be, the utility might still need to ask a few questions to ensure that they know, what meters map to what buildings. But essentially, once that handshake is performed, then through the use of web services, the utility can take the consumption data that they've compiled, and rather than sending it to the end user in order for them to upload it into Portfolio Manager, they can drop it directly into the customer's Portfolio Manager account. So they're basically eliminating the middleman. The nice thing about web services is once that handshake between the customer's account and the utility's account is set up, it remains in place until either party breaks it. So what that means is that this approach can be used not just for the initial provision of data, but it can be used for ongoing monthly updates. And as I noted, because that handshake, that link stays established once it's made, there's no need for the user to re-request data. If the utility has programmed their system to push through each month's worth of new data as it becomes available, then the customer will just be able to log into their Portfolio Manager account every month and know that their data have been updated. And as Tracy noted right before he handed off to me, one thing that's notable about Portfolio Manager Web Services is it really establishes a two-way connection between the utility and the customer, because it leverages the connection and sharing functionality in Portfolio Manager. So basically, by virtue of reaching out to you and requesting data via web services, the customer has acknowledged that you can send them data, and in return, you get to see their building. So there's this two-way connection where you're not just sending data off and then forgetting about it, but rather you have the opportunity to see how your customer's building is performing, and potentially how it is changing in its performance over time. And that's important because we know that utilities don't typically think about buildings, right? They think about accounts or groupings of meters. So this is an important new unit of analysis, that you have access to by virtue of web services. Now, it's probably no surprise given the setup that we believe that all else being equal, web services can provide the most benefit for the utility and the customer, assuming, of course, that the scope and number of buildings for which you need to provide data is high enough. There's no one-size-fits-all answer for at what point, at what number of customer buildings web services becomes cost-effective. But the idea here is there are additional benefits. We go beyond just basic access to data by streamlining the process for both the utility and the customer, allowing ongoing regular data exchanges, and then really focusing on that two-way flow of data. And one thing I do want to note here, so it doesn't get lost, in both the spreadsheet approach and the web services approach, I noted that right up front, right? Upon request, the data requester in either of these approaches is going to need to be able to tell the utility, hey, this is who I am, this is my building, and this triggers this process of meter to building mapping, right? If we're talking about delivery of aggregate whole building data, then, especially for the protection of individual tenant data privacy, then the utility will need on the back end to have some process in place for rolling up individual meters or accounts at the property into a total energy consumption number for the property as a whole. So I want to note that this meter to building mapping step is a critical element of aggregate data provision and is going to be part of either of these approaches, whether spreadsheet-based delivery or portfolio manager web services. So as we'll talk about next, portfolio manager web services probably does, or certainly does, require a bit more in terms of system build out, on the IT side or software side. But I wanted to note that in either one of these cases, there still is, the need to do that, that meter to building mapping in the background. So it's not like, the difference is between, no effort and web services. Even in the, aggregated whole building data via spreadsheet methodology, the utility will still need to come up with a process for effectively and efficiently mapping meters to buildings based on certain inputs from the customer. All right, so we're going to take a few minutes just to talk about portfolio manager web services themselves. I probably should have offered this caveat at the outset. I am not a developer, I'm not a programmer. I just know enough about the web services to be dangerous. So I'm not going to get too far down into the weeds here, but know that there are plenty of resources, and I can usually keep up with even the most technically minded folks for most of the way, and then any questions that go beyond my ability, we can draw upon the portfolio manager technical team for that. All right, so you've heard me talking about portfolio manager web services. What are they? They are a suite of web services that allow utilities to exchange data with portfolio manager. So essentially, this is it's a clunky term, but in the past we've called it machine to machine communication. It's a methodology that allows your system to perform data entry or data retrieval from a customer's portfolio manager account that otherwise would have needed to be done manually via the portfolio manager front end interface. And what this means is that, when you take the front end interface out of it, it facilitates both automation and bulk data transfer on the part of the data provider. It's still expected that the end user is going to interact with their portfolio manager data via their portfolio manager account in most cases of utility provided web services. But the point is, this is taking some work off their plate. So they don't need to go into portfolio manager each month and enter, new bills for each meter. They know that will be done for them. This is, I promise, as technical as we're going to get, more what our portfolio manager web services. It is a REST-based web services protocol using basic HTML methods to place calls, get, put, post, delete, basically equivalent to, read, edit, create, delete. All data, the payloads, this is a common question we get, sort of what is the format for the payloads. It is XML. It is not JSON for those who may be wondering. It's all the schemas for the actual content of the calls is XML. The web services, the 80 or so web services that are available, taken together, cover pretty much all of the functions that would otherwise be performed by the end user via the portfolio manager user interface. It doesn't cover every single element. It's not a one-for-one analog, but the vast majority of the services needed, including anything that a utility would need for passing through energy consumption data to customer building records is available via web services. And we want to note that EPA's responsibility is focused on the maintenance, guidance around, and technical support for the application programming interface, basically helping folks to understand what the web services are and how they get used. In terms of building out the solution on your end, either building it or procuring it from a vendor as a software as a solution product, that is the utility's responsibility. So we can't help you build the back end elements of your solution, but we can ensure that you are familiar with how to string together all of the necessary calls to do what you're seeking to do. There are plenty of on-site online resources available, including full technical documentation. I need to update this screenshot because we're actually running version 16.0 in both the live and test environment. But full documentation for both the live and test application programming interfaces. All the XML schemas are published. A full set of example requests and responses, so you can see what kind of content you'd be sending to Portfolio Manager and what you'd be receiving. There are release notes, guidance documents, and maintenance and update schedules. So you can find it here, portfoliomanager.energystar.gov/web services. If you are interested in getting, say, your IT team to start scoping this out to understand what it would take to pursue a web services solution, certainly a great first place to go is to point them to the API. The one thing I would recommend, however, is that web services not be seen as solely a IT or technical implementation, because as I noted before, Portfolio Manager Web Services really isn't anything different than manual benchmarking, right? At the end of the day, you're still going to have data in the customer's Portfolio Manager account. So it's really important to ensure that you have a firm grasp on how your customers are using Portfolio Manager, how it works in its sort of basic manual application. Because if you can understand the typical customer process flow and workflow through Portfolio Manager, that will provide a better sense of the points at which you may be able to automate certain functionalities, and in doing so, deliver more value and a better experience for your customers. Looking at time, I'm not going to go through this step by step, but I just want to point out that in the typical utility web service scenario, we've basically got three nodes. We've got a utility customer who has their own Portfolio Manager account. We've got the utility, which has its own Portfolio Manager account, and then they are each interacting with with their Portfolio Manager accounts, and data are flowing through and being exchanged between the two accounts. So, basically the utility customer is responsible for defining their property in Portfolio Manager and then initiating the handshake with their utility. The utility receives and processes, connection and share requests. Once that handshake is in place, they can begin sending back consumption data to their customer, who can then view this information in Portfolio Manager. So again, it all happens within Portfolio Manager, but the web services are kind of what's traveling between the two accounts. And again, if anybody has questions about this, we can dig in a little bit later, but I don't want to get too far down in the weeds. Some additional details worth noting. I'm not going to go through every one of these. The key takeaway here is with regard to who initiates the process and what kind of data security is in place. Basically, there is no ability for a utility or any other third party to ever just reach into a customer's Portfolio Manager account unilaterally. All right, every Portfolio Manager web services interaction has to be initiated by the Portfolio Manager user, who is probably either the property owner or manager or their consultant. And they initiate the process through connection and share requests. By the same token, utilities or other providers certainly can require acceptance of their own terms and provisions before they send any data through to the customer. If there is additional information that they need to gather in order to make their system work, they can require that as part of the web services transaction. And at any point in time, even though the web services handshake remains intact, at any point in time, either party can unilaterally break the connection and shares between them. So this is an opportunity to transfer data, but it does not provide an opportunity for somebody to look into your account or for you to look into somebody's account without their explicit permission. And once the service has been set up, you're not locked into it forever. So there are a number of key system design considerations, and probably what I'm going to do is come back to this when we get to the Q&A portion. These are, over the more than a decade that we've engaged with utility web service providers, these are some of the key considerations, questions, choice points that most commonly come up and that we would say really need to be wrestled with as you're mapping out your approach. Again, I will come back to this. I know in talking with the sponsors of this accelerator, there may be some interest in setting up sort of a separate off-cycle call that would allow us to dig a little bit more into some of these more technical considerations. But through this presentation, we're just gonna queue them up. Just so you know, I mean, you're in good company. Today, 52 utilities across the country provide data access in some way, shape, or form. Basically that means whole building aggregate data to help customers benchmark. The current breakdown is, it's about 80%, 70% of those utilities are choosing to use Portfolio Manager Web Services as their delivery mechanism, with the remainder choosing to use sort of a aggregated spreadsheet approach. Again, there's no wrong answer, but it's also good to know how the numbers are breaking out there across the country. I'd also note that in 2020, utilities helped benchmark more than 60,000 buildings via web services. So doing the math, that is more than 25% of all buildings benchmarked in Portfolio Manager in a given year are being serviced through a utility web service offering. All right, so in terms of next steps, well, first we're going to do a Q&A here, but one of the things that I know Tracy likes to say is in engaging with Energy Star, we encourage you to reach out early and often. Our goal is to help utilities explore the key considerations and best practices that others before them have gone through. And I know last month you already heard from Excel and Fort Collins and Centerpoint, and they are definitely have some best practices. So there's a great opportunity to learn more about what others have done. We consider a key role that we play to be kind of situating web services and data access within the broader, sorry if that's a typo, it should be customer use of Portfolio Manager. Again, it's important to understand how people use Portfolio Manager for benchmarking purposes before you start pushing ahead in the development of writing calls against an API. We do have experience advising utility IT teams as well as third-party vendors who design and deploy solutions on behalf of utilities, and we are always happy to facilitate networking with other utilities that have developed solutions or may have come up against similar barriers to the ones you may be facing, or questions or concerns you may have. So wherever we can facilitate peer-to-peer networking, that is always a top priority. And then this is the contact information. Tracy and myself, you've heard from today. Tracy has colleagues, Katie Hatcher and Brendan Hall at EPA, who support EPA's engagement with state and local governments. I don't know if either of them was able to make the call today, but they are certainly a key part of this team, and you may see them on future calls. So with that, I think we are at the anticipated sort of 15 minutes for Q&A portion, and I and Tracy would love to take any questions and answer as many as we can.
Thanks so much, Tracy and Andrew. That was great. Yep, into the Q&A section. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute, ask us in the chat here.
Andrew, the one thing you mentioned maybe is folks ponder what they may want to ask us about is to maybe go back to that consideration slide and while people are pulling together questions, maybe go through some of those, some of that content.
Sure. I think Andrew's popping off real quick and hopping back on. It seems like he lost sound, but I'm sure he's happy to do that. We do have a question here from Bill, who's wondering if there's security authentication to the web services.
And Tracy, I'm back now.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey there.
And did you catch the question?
Authentication?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that from the provider side, so yes, the short answer is yes. There's authentication and protection of data both at rest and in motion. Obviously, the end user is required to log in via their password protected portfolio manager account to initiate any requests. Similarly, the utility web or the web service provider is required to authenticate every call that they place. It is a simple authentication scheme. It uses the portfolio manager username and password associated with their portfolio manager account, but that authentication is required for every call. And then for data in motion, I can't spout off all the specs, not being sort of a data security expert. I do know that it uses transport layer socket security, TLS 1. I think it's 1.2 or higher. I know there actually was a change back in early 2019 where they deprecated support for TLS 1.0 and required higher levels of support. If you do have questions about the specific security architecture, please reach out to us, and that is something that we have provided to utilities in the past. We may not be able to answer every single question that a utility IT team might have, but typically in the past, the portfolio manager technical team has been able to compile the necessary information.
Great. Thank you, Andrew.
So Andrew, the one thing I was suggesting, I think when you had the disruption in service was maybe if, as folks are thinking about questions they might want to ask us, we could go back to the key considerations and maybe run through that.
Sure.
And then break if and when questions come in.
Yeah, and Tracy, and just to confirm, you heard me all through my presentation, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
I have been having some weird Teams issues where apparently I can be heard, but I cannot hear anybody. So I got done with my presentation and there was just silence. So if anybody was trying to break in, if anybody was trying to interrupt me, I just want to make clear I wasn't trying to bulldoze you.
No, you're good,
so-
Andrew. No worries.
No, you didn't bulldoze anyone.
All right.
But anyway, yeah, I was trying to talk to you and I realized you weren't there.
Got it. Yep. Well, I think we did get one other question.
Yeah, we do have one more question. Wondering what a typical implementation timeline looks like.
Sure. So I'm going to speak in generalities here, understanding that there's a little bit of hedging. What we tell people is this is probably going to be plan on a year. It could be done in 9 months. It could probably even be done in 6 months. It really depends on the extent and the complexity of your deployment. I mean, anecdotally speaking, I believe we were made aware of one public utility district in Washington who I think told us that their total level of effort to build out a very basic implementation was something like 250 hours. So I need to figure out what that converts into time wise. But we tell people, especially if you are at a larger utility, if you are wrestling with questions of meter to building mapping and sort of need to work out that logic, on the back end, from scoping to build out to testing to user acceptance to ultimate, production launch, probably, a year is the, is a good ballpark. Not to say it couldn't be done sooner, but I think, what's going to inform that are, and thank you for the segue. What's going to inform that are these, key system design considerations. One of the first things that's going to impact the timeline is, are you building in-house or are you engaging a vendor? There are a number of vendors out there at this point who have solutions. Typically, they are software as a service solutions that include the Portfolio Manager web services functionality to exchange data with Portfolio Manager. Some of these platforms sort of do a lot of other things. We've got a number of vendors who have kind of customer engagement platforms, to which they've appended, Portfolio Manager web services. There are also, a few vendors out there who have kind of targeted solutions just focused on the issue of meter to building mapping and aggregated whole building delivery for benchmarking. Jessica, I saw another question come in. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to break to answer that question?
Let me just break real quick, and I'll handle this question. We can throw back at you.
Sure.
Bill introduction. It's been approved to go in front of Assembly. However, it has not been presented yet. We'll keep you posted. The minute it goes in front of council, I'll send out an email to you all letting you know, because we're all very excited to see this go through. Give us a good idea of the timeline here. I'll keep you posted on any updates I get to when it's in that process. And then I'll pass this back to you, Andrew.
All right.
What are the approximate annual costs for the SaaS web services, SaaS?
Yeah, software as a solution.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so basically a subscription or vendor-based solution. This is where another area where we try to hedge, because we're not the ones who set the price out there. And honestly, unless it is specified in a filing, we don't always know what the budget was for a given implementation. I might kind of divert slightly from your most immediate question to say that I think the biggest difference in terms of developing in-house versus engaging a vendor is going to be the timing of costs. If you develop it in-house, you're going to have a larger upfront expenditure in terms of getting your systems up and running. And then in the out years, you would expect to have some, more predictable, lower costs associated with system maintenance, customer service, whatnot. With a vendor solution, you're not paying for the system development up front, but you could be paying a sort of an annual subscription fee or some sort of throughput cost or some combination of the two. When we get asked how much is this going to cost, our very, very broad suggestion is that this is probably going to be, not necessarily, but probably going to be sort of a six-figure investment. And probably on the lower end of that, low to mid. But the question, of course, is, what is the time frame over which that's spread? And do you have the ability to incur that all at once, or upfront through an in-house development, or are you good, procuring it as a service over time? All right, while we wait for the next questions, I'll just go through a few more of these system design considerations. It is really important to ensure that you're allowing for multiple use cases. You may have some users who have never used Portfolio Manager before, and so you're going to need to coach them or even allow your system to help them set up new accounts. Whereas you may have other partners or other customers who have been benchmarking for years, and they have an existing benchmarking record that they want you to sync up with. Both cases, are common and both need to be considered. As we mentioned earlier, if you're thinking about web services, a clear value here is the ongoing monthly upload of energy data. So in short, if you're going to take the time to build out a web services solution, we would encourage you to be pushing data on a monthly basis. That is the lowest level of granularity that Portfolio Manager can take. Portfolio Manager is not an interval data tool, so monthly is as that's as fine grained as you can get. But if you're going to go through the process of developing a web services implementation, benchmarking best practice is to update on a monthly basis. So this helps you to bring those capabilities to your customer. We did say that one place where the rubber really meets the road is in meter to building mapping. If you are providing aggregate whole building data, which is likely. So there are a lot. This is where there's both art and science involved. Certainly the complexity of this is going to depend on what your data system currently looks like, what kind of identifiers you have, what kind of queries you can run, between different records. But basically, you're going to need a mechanism for matching meters and accounts to a physical property address. You're going to need to provide some sort of opportunity for the property owner or manager to review and confirm, so that they have the ability to say, yep, you got them all, or no, I think you missed 3 of our largest tenants. Let's make sure those get into our aggregate consumption data. And then we definitely think it's best practice to not only establish this meter to building mapping, but also provide an opportunity to document it, such that both you and the customer can review it over time to ensure it's still accurate. Related to meter to building mapping and the aggregation of data, there are a few more fine-grained technical considerations that we can discuss at a later point in time, related to calendarization of individual meters into aggregated data, what to do and what you need to be providing if your customer has on-site renewable energy at their property, and then sort of best way to handle corrections and rebills. Since we know that's common. And then finally, and this is a big question, which could probably generate a conversation all of its own, but given the fact that web services enables this two-way exchange of data between the utility and the Portfolio Manager end user, the question then becomes, how do you take that Portfolio Manager data and start using it to better target, deliver, understand, evaluate your existing energy efficiency programs? As we tell people very frequently, benchmarking isn't the end game here. Benchmarking is the beginning, right? Once you have benchmarking data in place, then the opportunity exists to figure out how to help that building owner improve the energy performance of their property. So that's really what we're trying to drive here, is help utilities get through the technical implementation so they can then take that information and figure out how to use it to better achieve savings, both for their goals and targets, as well as for their customers' goals and targets and pocketbooks.
Thanks, Andrew. We do have another question in the chat from Jacqueline. She's wondering about the best spreadsheet to use if they decide to go the spreadsheet route. Do you want to discuss the portfolio manager spreadsheets in terms of the one provided for electric versus the one provided for gas? And
yeah, let me just see if I can bring this up quickly. So thank you for sharing this. So basically, if you are providing data via spreadsheet, these columns here are representative of the basic information that Portfolio Manager requires. So if you were to format data in this format, start date, end date, usage, a column for cost, which can be blank, and then, estimation, basically that's a yes or no as to whether the value is estimated or actual. If you format data in this way, it can be pretty easily uploaded by the end user directly into Portfolio Manager. In fact, there's a relatively new functionality where at the meter level, they could actually go in and copy and paste information from a correctly formatted spreadsheet directly into their Portfolio Manager account. So yes, what you are showing here is the most basic information needed by Portfolio Manager, where every line would be a meter consumption record, and all else being equal, that should be roughly a month. We don't require the data to be 1st of the month through the 31st of the month, but we do, we typically suggest, unless it's a delivery, like unless it's diesel or fuel oil, we would expect every period to be, around a month, and certainly not more than 2.
Great. Thanks so much. And if anybody else has any further questions, feel free to throw them in the chat now, but I think otherwise we'll wrap things up a few minutes over here. Feel free to reach out to me, anyone here that's spoken with us today, Andrew or Tracy, or even Caddy and Brendan here, and we can get back to you on that. One further question on the spreadsheet formatting. Yes. So Andrew, do you want to take this one in terms of spreadsheet formatting available on the website?
Yeah, like the most basic way to get this, and let me just pull up my screen. So within Portfolio Manager, if you go in and you go to a property, and then you dig in at the meter level, you'll see here that there is, right down here, use this single meter spreadsheet. So if you click that link, that will open up. Give me just one moment. That will open up this spreadsheet, which currently is, and if you actually download, if you build your spreadsheet based on this template, you would actually be able to fill it out, and then the user could come into their Portfolio Manager meter and upload it directly.
Great. And is that spreadsheet different if you wanted to have an electric meter or a gas meter uploaded?
No. Electric or gas would not be different. It's still, start date, end date. The usage would assume that the usage is being reported in whatever unit of measurement has been set up for the meter. Yeah, I mean that's the basic information needed. And there's also additional information about demand, which is optional, but basically it's just items A through E that are required.
So if we filled out these required information points for their electric data, for instance, you would then need this same spreadsheet, but a separate one for gas. So you wouldn't want to include both.
That's right. That's a great point. Yep. At the Portfolio Manager level, this is intended as a meter level spreadsheet.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. All right. Well, final call for questions. Let us know if you need anything. We're here for emails. Also follow-up conversations about any of this information. I do know that the EPA is here to help out with anyone looking to get started on these web services. So feel free to reach out to get that process started if you are looking to jump in. What I think one of the takeaways should be is a team effort from the group. So IT will need to be involved in some sort of formatting way, but it's important to have someone from your team familiar with benchmarking. As you can see, there are clear needs on the owner's side in order to become in compliance with this bill that then impact the data and what is needed from you on the utility side. So working together as a group to kind of format to get the most out of this process is highly recommended. So please let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will be sending out these resources to you soon, as well as a follow-up email to get your feedback, some opinions on what we might want to do for our 6th and Flex workshop, just any remaining needs, revisit any topics, anything like that, thoughts on what we want to do there. I do know that the EPA is also willing to follow up with a technical session, diving deeper into these web services, the technical side of actually implementing this and getting this going from the ground up. So feel free to let me know if you're interested in that type of meeting. We can get something set up there. I really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate your time, Tracy and Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you all next month.
Great. Our pleasure. Very welcome.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.